This panel is moderated by Louis Etienne Dubois, who we heard from yesterday. Louis is Associate Professor of Creative Industries Management at Ryerson University. And he'll be speaking with Marie-Josée Adam from Cirque du Soleil, Tim Jennings from the Shaw Festival, Elizabeth Ludwig from the West Ampleton Arts Tour, and Janice Montour from the Woodland Cultural Center. All right, I'm gonna pass it over to Louis Etienne and he will introduce the panel and get things going.
Thank you, Ruth, and welcome everyone. So today's discussion asks, how do cultural destinations outside of urban centers reach tourists? And how obviously this process has been affected by the pandemic. What's more, at a time when visits are entirely made up of the hyperlocal and likely again for the summer ahead, we want to know how these sites engage audiences from near and far and how they plan on reconnecting with visitors as travel slowly resumes. So as Ruth mentioned, joining me to explore these questions today are Janice Montour, who's the Executive Director of the Woodland Cultural Center in Bradford, Marie-Josée Adam, who's the Executive Producer and Head of Creative Studio at Cirque du Soleil Entertainment Group, Elizabeth Ludwig from the West Hamilton Arts Tour, and finally Tim Jennings, who's the Executive Director and CEO of the Shaw Festival in Niagara-on-the-Lake. So welcome everybody. Obviously the first question I have for all of you to begin with is, you give us a sense of the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on your organization, your operations in the last 15 months or so. So Tim, I saw you unmuted yourself. You want to get things going?
Sure, I can start off. So the Shaw has been in an interesting position. In 2015-16, I took out, along with my CFO, pandemic interruption insurance, which has insulated us against a lot of the issues of the last 16 months. We were able to get through the last year, keeping all 550 of our staff on, and we're able to produce over 800 pieces of digital content, 65 live concerts last fall in conjunction with FedDev Ontario and Celebrate Ontario, to be able to pilot some ideas about how we might work in the pandemic in smaller pieces that still drove tourism to the area. And we also were able to pivot and take 96 of our artists from gig work to put them on summer employment programs in education and outreach, and use that education and outreach primarily digitally to keep all of those people employed, and the wage subsidy did help to help us get through the last year in a net surplus. So it actually turned out to be a pretty good year in terms of what we were making lemonade out of lemons, for sure. Right now we're rehearsing 6 shows. We've been doing that for 8 weeks by Zoom, and just on Friday we started back live outdoors, and have added about $500,000 worth of new tents and equipment to allow for outdoor performances so that we can start performing in early July. So that's sort of where we are in a nutshell.
Well, that's good to know. Janice, what about you in Brantford?
Yeah, so we were obviously hit like everyone else. We had to rely on the wage subsidy to sort of keep as much of our employment as possible. And primarily, I think for us, we were able to take some of our programs to Facebook Live events through our Zoom account, and we were unable, unfortunately, to take most of our exhibitions online. But we were able, for a short five-month period, able to allow restricted access to the museum and galleries. Probably our biggest or most sought out after digital content was our virtual tour of the residential school. So that continued for this year.
Thank you. And Elizabeth, what about you? What did you do with the tour in the last year?
West Hamilton Arts Tour is primarily a volunteer-run organization, so we're not dealing with salaries, we're not dealing with employed people, which makes it a very different experience. But we were obviously not able to run our May tour either this year or the previous year in person. So we took the tour, the first year we took the tour entirely online and promoted it through social media only, because we were lacking funding to be able to promote it any other way, just because people were not paying into it. It worked out okay. There were some sales, but compared to previous years, artists did about 10% of what they usually do at the West Hamilton Art Tour, because the tour is very popular in our area and draws a lot of people from, even from Toronto. We've even had some people come in from Buffalo. And this year we pared the tour down, hoping that we could do an in-person smaller gallery show. So we invited sort of the core group of artists to display in a gallery, and last minute we were shut down and ended up having to do virtual tours. So we did private virtual tours for people where we would walk around the gallery and show virtually the show. So we've managed somehow, but obviously it's nowhere the same.
So again, so you've managed somehow, and Tim was mentioning making lemonade out of lemons. You know, obviously in-person activities, very much limited, a lot of uncertainty in terms of decision-making. Are we going to move forward, not move forward? What are some of the opportunities that you've perhaps uncovered along the way, or that you've, you know, a lot of you have mentioned coming up with a lot more content online. Is there an opportunity there? Is there a chance to perhaps reach new audience and, who knows, translate those virtual audiences into in-person audiences in the future?
How do you want to do this, Louis?
Well, I think Marie-Josée was gonna jump in, but we can go to you after Tim.
Yeah, I was just about to say that obviously it created a lot of opportunity, and I think people were really in a survival mode, trying to generate some content and to offer the audience, stay connected to the audience, and offer a new type of content, whether it's virtual or any other very innovative way of performing, such as, you know, performance, and when the audience stayed in their cars. And so people were very creative over the past years. What I noticed, though, what we noticed from the industry and our partner, is that we were wondering a lot during the past year if that would be like a solution that would be sustainable, and if it is something that would stay and maybe change also the way people would consume art and culture and live entertainment. But it seems that people really need to have this contact, and to have, like, to be able to gather and to visit and to travel. And the tendency we see right now, whether it is in Quebec, in Canada, Quebec on my part, but in Canada, in the States, and worldwide, is that people are, right now that the tickets are on sale, people are the sales are exploding everywhere, and people really need to go and travel and see and gather in space. So that's very, very encouraging. It probably helped attract people from other region, because it's just helped, like, connecting in a different way. So people who were not traveling before, were not going to see art and culture, discovered probably a new world that they will now travel to. So I think that's also a very good opportunity that we had during the past year.
Tim?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I think I agree with all of that. My thought process of this last year has been that, as an arts charity, that we focused entirely on how we related to our communities and wherever they were, and tried to support them in the ways that they needed through this period. I agree that that live art, especially, is a basic human need, and it serves basic human needs. And so the act of gathering, the act of sharing stories in a group, that shared empathy, is something that can't be translated online particularly well, but there are things we can do, and we did. We also saw a lot of our production workers and people doing work to help local community charities, building masks and PPE gowns. Our wardrobe department, there's 60 people in it, went to work building PPE for all of the local hospitals and hospices, and the public health units. Those sorts of things, I think, really deepened the relationship over the last year. And what we're finding now is, although we're not interested in digital performance, we are interested in expanding the outreach and keeping in touch with people who come to us on an annual basis as a destination, in a way that keeps a 365 relationship to those people. And in fact, one of the things we've been doing, and I'm excited about, is a wellness initiative where we've actually have weekly classes and in both things like yoga and physical activities, but as well as just conversations, book clubs, etc., that have all started to explode through this conversation about how do we come back to the Shaw, but how do we know more about it by the time we get there, which is great. So.
Great. Janice, Elizabeth, what about you? Are you hopeful to see perhaps new faces, or in some way have re-energized your existing audience with the content that you've been pushing online?
Absolutely. We've seen, large international audiences attend most of our, online events, which we never would have seen normally. Our demographic is primarily, visiting friends and relatives who come to our site in Brantford. Last year, we were able to partner with some really, great community organizations to come together to try to enhance audiences, but also to make things work in socially distanced outdoor gatherings. We offered 2 outdoor live performances before we were shut down in the fall, and we sold out tickets in literally minutes, which we never would normally do in a given season. So I think the appetite is definitely there. I think people are very hungry to see live art, like Tim and Marie-Josée were saying. It's, people are going to travel now to see these. But also, I think the online really pushed us to be really creative in what we were producing and content driven. So, maybe what we were doing normally was sort of status quo sometimes in some of our regular programming. We really had to expand that and really entice audiences to want to see what we were doing, because we had to sort of create our own niche, which we do in our Indigenous arts content, but we really had to push that envelope because we were competing with so much online content. So I think it really, made us think outside the box, and I think because of that, we were able to gather new audiences as a result.
I would say the same thing with the West Hamilton Art Tour. We were able to sort of piggyback on a few other festivals and events that were going on online in Ottawa and Montreal, and actually gained some following from those cities because of that, which was very interesting because Hamilton is quite far from Montreal and Ottawa to be able to gain following from those cities. So yeah.
And in a way, I mean, those are all areas that, to some extent, did gain some resonance. Some, people moving in the area because of the pandemic, moving out of the big centers. So that's also potentially a new market for you to reach. So, things are slowly reopening. I mean, a lot of you are pointing out to tickets being sold out very quickly. So we can expect some stiff competition, or at the very least, a lot of different offerings during a limited period of time. And so, visitors and audiences having a lot of options. So what's your strategy to, coming out of the pandemic to, capture those eyeballs and to bring those visitors in?
Sure. So it's an interesting question, because with capacities reduced, I'm not actually sure that we're going to know that for the first year. I feel like, under the previous color code system here in Ontario, we were looking at 50 people indoors and 100 people outdoors for performance. That would have been an eighth of what we would normally do, and we'll maximize those capacities before we would ever see them. So the question of what it looks like in 21 versus 22 or further out is significantly different, I think. In a normative year, our company would generate $20-something million in ticket sales of a $35 million budget, but we would amplify about $220 million of local economic impact. That is not going to happen in 21. Our goal is ultimately, how do we put enough content out and move into a 365 programming space to help the economy locally come back, because thousands of jobs in our sector rely on us being up and running for them to have work. And in a town of 18,000 people, with 550 of those people working for the Shaw Festival, it's a significant portion of our local income, and something that we really need to focus on. So our hope is to try to, there's good information coming out of SARS and other previous significant issues, 9/11, et cetera, that the faster one returns to normalcy in terms of programming, or even goes past that, the faster the recovery for the area occurs. So that's how our programmatic space, we're trying to do as much as possible. This summer we'll run 6 different productions and repertory, as well as running concerts and extra activities to try to generate as much activity within those confined numbers as we can. And that's really our game.
I think we're also in the same boat in Brantford. We obviously smaller region, and working in our community at Six Nations. A lot of our stuff will probably be a hybrid for the remainder of this year. So you'll see a mixture of online content with in-person, obviously with reduced capacities. And like I said, we're going to continue building on our partnerships, as that really is what sort of got us through last year, is sort of continuing those partnerships with community organizations and other presenting partners, to ensure that we are reaching as broad of an audience as possible. But I think for the remainder of 2021, the hybrid model will have to continue, because we can't totally get away with digital. And then also sort of keeping an eye on how everything unfolds for the fall and winter, which would normally be our busiest season. It is going to be a struggle, I think, continued for the remainder of this year.
Thank you. And Marie-Josée, what about what is CIRC's approach to the content in smaller markets, for instance, Trois-Rivières in Quebec?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think we took the past year and we're still taking a step back right now and creatively thinking of what, like, after this year of pandemic, what people want to see, and what, like, we are asking ourselves the question a lot of, like, does what people wanted to see a year ago is still what they want to see today and experience in terms of live entertainment. So we're asking ourselves a lot of these questions of what do they want to experience, what emotions they want to feel after, like, everything that just happened. This needs, everybody has to, to be close to each other. I think there's a sense now of authenticity that is needed, and humility and kindness. And so it shifts also the type of content that we want to provide to the audience. We were very lucky in having, like, very engaged partner in different regions in the world. For instance, also Trois-Rivières, where we just postponed the programming that was planned for 2020 first. So we had to postpone most of the programming to end of 2021 and 2022. So we're getting prepared to that, and what we're doing now is, as I said, really revising the approach we had. We're just and see, like, the type of content we can propose to them for the audience when they're going to be ready to come back.
Well, that's an interesting point, and perhaps Elizabeth, just based on what Marie-Josée just said, is your programming, or what you plan on doing in the coming years, just the same but postponed, or something different because there are some new needs or preferences or sensibilities?
We are hoping that we won't have to postpone it, but we're very lucky because we only run the tour once a year. It's a long Mother's Day weekend, so it starts on a Friday morning and it ends on a Sunday night. So it's really a very small event, and we're hoping that by May 2022, we'll be able to return back to some sort of a normal. But we are exploring the idea of maybe setting up studios outdoors in tents as well, so that there's more of a community involvement. So on sort of our main street, which is the Lock Street area, that we could set up in parking lots tents with studio sort of samplings of studios, so that it's not all just within the homes of the artists, but that it also involves a little bit of street traffic. So that's the direction we're going in.
Thank you. So, Tim pointed out, the impact of your organizations and your programming is very important for the communities that you're in, and so it gives a sense of who you work with, local organizations, tourism organizations, to get the word out and get people in. And perhaps if this is bound to change coming out of the pandemic.
We generally work with the City of Hamilton, with the City of Dundas, for sort of putting out posters and banners. And then our local Hamilton TV station, CHCH, has been very supportive. They always do little blurbs and little interviews with our group. I think we will continue that. I think that post-pandemic, we're going to focus a lot more on getting the word out on social media and really, really working that market a lot more, because we discovered that we can get a lot of traction in that market. That was a little bit of a new thing for us. Other than that, I think that we're probably going to do kind of the same thing.
Thank you. Tim, Janice?
Sure. We're a binationally incorporated company, and with 60% of our audience from Canada and about 40% from the US, 1 to 2% international. So we advertise in all of those markets. About 5,000 households a year normally come from San Diego, California to the Shaw Festival. So I mean, we have quite a range of folks that see us as an annual destination. We're able to directly market to everybody we normally hit. We're also in places like the New York Times and the Condé Nast magazines and national and international travel publications. I'm also sitting on a couple of international recovery organizations around performing arts and COVID, and so able to work with those groups to try to figure out sort of best practices and where people are trying to talk about these kind of destination issues. We in Stratford and a bunch of other destination theaters speak to each other fairly regularly about how we're all working through this, and so it gives us a sense of those sort of communities. Locally, we're working very carefully with the local community to try to do everything we can to help people start back. So there's a whole bunch of local stakeholders where we're very involved, especially through Tourism Niagara on the Lake, the Niagara Tourism Association, the Chambers of Commerce, etc. So.
Yeah, and so we work as well with Six Nations Tourism and the City of Brantford Tourism, as well as our RTO, Hamilton Halton Brant region. And you know, we typically market only to a regional level. I mean, typically our visitors only come within an hour to 2 hour drive radius. We see some international content over the summer months. But obviously we haven't seen that in the past couple of years. We don't intend to see those markets necessarily come back right away. And then, of course, in the last 3 weeks, the organization has been under a lot of media, as we are the former site of the Mohawk Institute Residential School. So that's added a whole other lens in the last 3 weeks. So the visitorship just coming by to our site has been enormous in the last 3 weeks.
And what about you, Marie-Josée, in Trois-Rivières? Who do you work with to get people from, say, Quebec City or Montreal to drive to Trois-Rivières for a show?
Well, our situation is a little bit different when we are really working with the local promoter and whose mandate is, of course, to create a show and to be revenue based, but also to generate some foot traffic in the region. So we are providing them with all the tools to be able to promote the show and the content we're proposing, so they can then promote everywhere in Quebec. And of course, we're using our own platform also to promote the activities. What we noticed, though, that is very interesting, is that we're working with, of course, with a lot of tourism organizations around the globe in Trois-Rivières, but also in different cities, and they all have the same objective, whether they're in Trois-Rivières, in Ontario, or in Hamilton, or in Malta. So and what's interesting is to see how in the past couple of months the phone started ringing again. We really feel that right now the tourism organization are planning the future, end of 2021 and 2022, and they are ready to invest and to make sure that they're going to be ready once the borders open and once the regions open, and that will be able to do gatherings. So it's already in the case where some places where we, like in Malta, we have a show opening at the end of the year, which will be our first regional show to be produced and delivered there. So because we see how the borders are opening also in Europe. So that's very interesting to see, like how all the tourism organizations around the globe are on the same page right now, and how it could be beneficial for the cultural and artistic industry to collaborate now with them and being very proactive with those organizations.
Yeah, and Tim, you mentioned being on this group where you share some best practices. What are some of the best practices that you heard that you found particularly interesting for smaller markets?
Well, it's an interesting thing. Internationally, it's an interesting thing. The Americans, for instance, are using things like vaccine passports, where they're really looking at those questions about being able to attend events because you've been able to prove vaccination are complicated in Canada by our privacy laws. And so there's these sort of questions about how we're, especially for international tourists, how we're going to be able to show them how they will know that they're safe. And so we've been working, for instance, with there are a couple of international agencies in tourism that offer a stamp of approval if you submit a plan to them. And so we've been doing that as an example. TAIO in Ontario is acting as a conduit for that work here. So you can absolutely make application and get a stamp of approval for your sites on that. Shaw was the first performing arts company in Canada to do that, but we were hoping to be up and running last year. So, you know, here we are. The other things that I'm seeing a lot of are just around congregate testing, around HEPA filtration, around cleaning using electrostatic equipment for soft seat venues. I mean, all sorts of what I would call kind of small capital investments that will have big impact on how people's perceptions of safety are increased. And that's important. It's also important for the artists. Under the Ontario rules, artists are one of the performing artists are one of the exempted groups that don't have to wear masks when they're rehearsing or performing. And so that causes nervousness among them. And so how we work with them to ensure that they feel safe by making sure they have access to vaccine, et cetera, has been a significant portion of our work getting ready for rehearsals. And in fact, we've decided to keep using masks right up until the very last minute for that reason. So.
Janice, we talked about how we get the word out. Let's talk about the what. What is that message? What is the unique value proposition for this sort of programming in smaller markets? Or, you know, what's the message? And is this message perhaps likely to resonate more coming out of the pandemic?
Yeah, so, you know, our message has always been, you know, staying true to our mandate and sticking to our programming philosophy. But I think for the general public, what they really want to see is things that they do feel safe at, like what Tim was mentioning. They want to make sure that you are following those protocols, that you have frequently asked questions on your website, very readily available, so people can ask those questions. So we've been doing that from the start to have those FAQs ready on our website. But also, you know, my visitor services coordinator is constantly updating. You know, people don't enter our site without getting their temperature checked, without, you know, doing the questionnaire of COVID. But also, you know, they feel a little bit more safer understanding, you know, there's limited capacities, you know, timed entries into our facility for the indoor experience. But for our outdoor experience as well, you know, we have, you know, social circles, what we call them, that actually we have changed one of our existing venues into sort of an outdoor stage, which we normally would never use. And people are feeling a little bit safer in that, you know, being able to stay in their vehicle to watch a performance versus getting out and sitting, you know, amongst other people. So those options have always been, and we're being very flexible with our audience on those. You know, people will ask us, you know, do we have to stay within our household? Absolutely, yes, at this time. That's what we're moving forward with. But they really want to be able to experience live art, but in a safe way. So we, like I said, we are looking at the programming that currently going forward for the summer and early fall is definitely still going to be outdoor based, because that's what people are comfortable with right now. We haven't seen a big push to get indoors from our audiences. So outdoor programming has been a little interesting. Obviously, you have weather to commend with, but the audiences have been very receptive to that.
Elizabeth, what's the appeal? What's the pitch for the tour, or for, you know, this sort of programming outside of large urban centers?
I think the West Hamilton Art Tour really draws the community together, because even though there's a number of artists that actually have studios that they live in and work in that get opened to the public, and people can come through and ask questions and have a very intimate setting where they can meet the artist and see the work. But we also have this very unique thing where a lot of our community open up their homes and invite artists from outside of the area. So we actually are able to draw approximately 30 to 40 artists and place them all within a walking tour so that if somebody comes into town, they can park a car, walk the tour, go for lunch on Lock Street, continue walking the tour and spend the whole day doing just that and really enjoying sort of intimate one-on-one moments with the artists within the community. And I think that part, that sort of community building part, that sort of intimacy is going to continue to be the draw for this tour. And if we can in May to do it safely and actually do open up these homes and these studios, I think that we will go back to that model because it's really worked well and it brings together the artists, the buyers, the community, like the whole thing, and it becomes a very intimate and lovely way of enjoying art.
Yeah, it's a good it's a great example you're mentioning. Marie-Josée, let me frame it this way. What do people who are used to going to a Cirque du Soleil show, what are they getting in a Trois-Rivières or in a Malta that they're not getting elsewhere in terms of experience?
Yes, and this is a very important question that we asked ourselves at the beginning of this partnership with for example, the city of Trois-Rivières, how we can make sure that we understand the city's objective I mean, they're doing this investment because at the end want to attract tourism in their region. So it was important for us to really develop a unique selling proposition that would differentiate ourselves, Cirque du Soleil, from all the other shows that we're proposing in the same, the same province, but also making sure that it will attract tourism, because what we will be proposing will be the only place in the world they could see where they will see and live this experience. So we decided in 2015 to create a tribute show where it will be a Cirque du Soleil tribute to iconic musical artists from Quebec. And we started with artists such as Beau Damage and Les Colocs and Robert Charlebois, and it proved to be a huge success, where finally we have the same numbers of ticket sales in Trois-Rivières than in our big top in Old Port in Montreal, which was incredible and very impressive. So and it generated a all new audience and demographic in Trois-Rivières also that they didn't have before. So it was very important for us to really listen to our partners and understand their objective and create something that was unique. And this is something we do all the time. And I think it's important to also, this is an approach we took with Trois-Rivières, but we also often look at, what the region has to offer and find a way to create something that really celebrates the region, celebrates what's there, celebrates the locals, using as much as possible, working with the local suppliers, local artists, and it is very important to have their buy-in throughout this whole process too. So this is really what we wanted to achieve with Trois-Rivières, which I feel we had a great success.
And speaking of the area, the region, Tim, I mean, I have a feeling that you're selling as much the Niagara area and the community as the festival itself, right? So is that part of the offering?
It is. It's we're unusual in that a lot of theaters would talk about selling a show, and we sell a season, we sell a destination. Niagara and the Lake and the Niagara region generally are a remarkable draw in and of themselves, and obviously, Niagara Falls itself is the largest tourist destination in Canada, but Niagara on the Lake actually generates normally about 3 million visitors a year, of which we're about 12% of that. About 325,000 people come down to see things specifically at the Shaw. What's great about our folks is they anchor very long stays. They're there for a week, 2 weeks, and they'll go out to the rest of Ontario, but they anchor that in Niagara on the Lake because of the food, because of the wineries, because of the great hotels. It's a mature destination. And so we see that as an ecosystem that we all have to build together. I just was chatting with somebody about the gardens across the whole region and how fantastic Niagara on the Lake is visually at this time of year. And so even on the weekends, we're still seeing 25,000 people a weekend coming down under restrictions. They're still coming down to walk the Canada trails and the parks, Canada spaces, and to look at the gardens. That gardening in Niagara on the Lake is a competitive sport. So there's a pretty significant amount of sort of beauty right now that you can get outdoors and for free. So it's a good place to come.
Now, a lot of you did mention, having reached new audiences and being fairly optimistic for the future. So if there's growth in sight, how do you balance, your organization's growth, your production's growth with the local community, with what that means in terms of infrastructure needs or stress that might put on the area? So how do you balance that between having this kind of tourism orientation and working within a smaller community?
Well, I sit on the Mayor of Niagara-on-the-Lakes recovery team with a bunch of other tourism management folks. We have a regular conversation with the town about how we're all working together to try to bring back tourism in a safe way. We've also, our guild, we have 350 volunteers. We've created a program with the town for those volunteers to be out helping with welcoming to the town. So they're out on weekends talking to people, making sure they're wearing their masks, talking to them about what they can and can't do. These are the sorts of things where just some local activism, I think, can be really helpful. It's also a measured intention. We don't want to jump back up to 3 million people a year until it's safe to be able to do that. But at the same time, we want to come back quickly. And we know that although I think it'll take longer for corporate groups to come back and for those organizations to make good decisions about reinvesting in conferences, et cetera, where I do see people coming back right away is through this is sort of personal tourism, as we're talking about. And that's, in some ways that's harder because you have to tell each individual group all of the details and rules and special things that are going on. So trying to find ways to do that at the town entrances with digital signage, all that sort of thing has been a big part of our group meetings. And I think it's working pretty well. We've worked with Bell Canada, the town has worked with Bell Canada and with other cell providers to track traffic in and out of the area. So we get a sense of what's local versus what's not by cell phone code. And that's been really helpful in seeing what kind of messaging we need to put out, what measurements. And they've been doing that now for a year and a bit, and we have really good data on it. So I would say, and if a town of 18,000 people can do that, I recommend that most communities can.
What about you, Janice? I mean, again, given the market in which you're in, do you feel that it's not just about you being ready to reopen, but also kind of making sure that the community is also ready to reopen and working with them in that direction?
Absolutely. And also, along with Tim, I'm on the Mayor's Economic Recovery Task Force here in the city of Brantford. And I think we're fortunate. Brantford has seen a lot of growth in the last few years prior to the pandemic. So, we have more accommodations available. Six Nations of the Grand River has also added more accommodations, which is, has been really sought after for many, many years. So I think we were actually ready for growth in 2020, and then everything shut down. So I think we are ready for that. I think the heightened sort of lens on us right now as having one of the longest running residential schools in the country that I manage here at the center is also going to be a huge draw, and it has been and will continue to be for the next few years. We don't officially see us reopening the school itself for another 2 years. We're still under restoration work, but the programming around that and that outreach in specifically the education market, which that's a whole different tourism market and education, but that's also one that we'll continue to build. And so we are ready from a digital aspect in that regard, but also for in-person visits. And the city and the community at Six Nations are very conscious of all those protocols for COVID.
Right, and Marie-Josée, you mentioned you gave the case of Malta. I mean, Cirque's been through a rough patch, and if Cirque's ready, that's one thing. But how do you make sure that your local partners are also ready, and that this is going to be beneficial not just for you, but also for the local community?
Yeah, totally. I mean, we are in constant communication with our partners, and since day one of this pandemic, and we work really hand in hand in making sure that we're both ready and to take decisions together. What's interesting that was happening before the pandemic, but I see becoming more important again is now part of our mandate, not only to create entertainment in region, but also to have a legacy for the region. So it's really it's something that we have to think through when we create a show or performance. And I'm saying that because creating a legacy in teaching the local artists, teaching the local technicians, teaching the local, all the having the suppliers able to provide, like for big shows, it allows them also to grow and to create that legacy where they can then create more and more shows in that region. And it helps us also because then when we go back there, then all the expertise is present. So it's really a win-win situation with our partners in regions.
So I want to be mindful of the time here, but I'll try to squeeze in one question from our audience. It's kind of a mix of two questions, but what is the long-term plan in terms of hybrid offerings, hybrid delivery? Is it something that you see yourself doing in 2, 3, 5 years from now? Is this a plan, or is this kind of slowly more of a transition towards back to what you were doing before?
Well, I know for us, the digital work we're doing in education and outreach is an ongoing expansion. I mean, we've seen really good take up on it. We're currently running education programs into places like Buffalo, the very northern communities of Canada, which we would never been able to access before. And we think that's fantastic. So of course, we're going to continue that work. It's also remarkable to see folks in some of our most distant relationships, those people who do anchor a 2-week or week stay here in Ontario each year as part of their vacation, but they want to be part of it. So we want to make sure that there's an offering there. I don't think we'll see any kind of expansion into digital performance, but that's because we're focused on live performance. It's what we're charitably incorporated to do, and that's where we want to be. So anything that will drive people back to the well, as they say, is what we're interested in continuing.
Right, and that's all the time we have. Janice, Marie-Josée, Elizabeth, and Tim, thank you so much for your time. This was very insightful, and I hope that our audience enjoyed the presentation as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.